Welcome everyone to the Urantia book. We are checking out the Buddhist faith today. This is on page 1036. It's important to note the origins of this writing is a Melchizedek, which is an advanced celestial being. Believe it or not, you'll just have to read it and see for yourself. But in case you wanted to know why we're able to get an insight onto Siddhartha's actual teachings versus what has been handed down and what has become modern Buddhism, because as you'll see, both of these are presented in this Buddhist faith paper, then that is why this being is an ancient advanced celestial being who was literally on the planet, or at least observing the planet during this phase of our planetary growth, I guess. Okay, the Buddhist faith. To become a Buddhist, one merely made public profession of the faith by reciting the refuge. I take my refuge in the Buddha. I take my refuge in the doctrine. I take my refuge in the brotherhood. They say merely here because there are some religions and faiths which require so much more in-depth initiation rituals. Perhaps one would say even gathering together 10 or 12 of your buddies and a priest and dunking you in the river there might be a little bit more complicated. I'm not sure. For me personally, this is even too complicated for me. I don't make formal or public professions of faith. That is simply something between me and God that exists and takes origin in my heart. So that I'm not really... I believe they call this the triple diamond. And if people like formalities and that sort of thing, then I could see how that's a merely simple sort of thing. The Buddha, again, I'm not sure. I know they don't consider Buddha God, so there's some confusion in my mind as far as exactly what that is. I take refuge in the doctrine. I have a vague understanding of it. The brotherhood, I'm not exactly sure if that's the brother and sisterhood of all or the brotherhood of Buddhists. If it's only the brotherhood of Buddhists, I would categorically disagree with it, because as spiritualists, we're supposed to have the brotherhood and sisterhood of all humans, regardless of their religion. Remember, this is about unity, uniformity. This isn't about just nitpicking. If somebody's interested in this stuff, then they should, there's very noble things. And in fact, Buddhism was important in my own spiritual journey. And it is a great kind of tool to have in order to confront various life experiences that you're having and to understand it. So it should be something that's understood, but we'll see where its shortcomings are as we continue on. Buddhism took origin in a historic person, not in a myth. Gautama's followers called him Sasta, meaning master or teacher. While he made no superhuman claims for either himself or his teaching, again, that's the perspective of Melchizedek can know that, his disciples early began to call him the enlightened one, the Buddha, and later on Sakyamuni Buddha. So his disciples were adding these additional things as what happens when humans have, and as they said in this previous line, modern Buddhism is no more the teachings of Gautama Siddhartha than Christianity is the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. So you see how much human input was happened between both of these individuals. The original gospel of Gautama was based on 4 noble truths. The noble truths of suffering, the origins of suffering, the destruction of suffering, and the way to the destruction of suffering. So, closely linked to the doctrine of suffering and the escape therefrom was the philosophy of the Eightfold Path: right views, aspirations, speech, conduct, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and contemplation. I view those very positively. You want to have this right view. Where does right come from? For me, it comes from God, a personal deity that is the source of ideals in the universe, a creator personality. How Buddhism is able to sort of have these things without a creator personality. Let's look at these. The noble truths of suffering I look at as sort of a negative, the destruction of suffering. That, to me, is a sort of negative framework in order to have a life view or a life philosophy. I would replace that with doing the will of God. So that way you're positively, actively doing something rather than trying to just do destruction of suffering. Because if I say, the destruction of suffering, and maybe I just don't know enough about Buddhism, but what if we just destroyed everything? Would we fulfill our goal in the destruction of suffering? I'm not sure. That word destruction leaves room for my mind to go destruction, 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 rather than doing is more of a proactive, ascend in the universe sort of approach. But I get where they're coming from. I mean, suffering, we want to end people's suffering. We want to make sure that there's not victims on the planet. But how do we go about that as spiritualists or sons and daughters of God? How do we go about that is by doing the will of God. And in doing the will of God, we will eventually unwind from this state of this, backwards. So we got all these rights. It was not Gautama's intention to attempt to destroy all efforts. So here you go. This is where his intention and now what it's become has been different. Now we think of destroying all effort as the way to end this sort of thing. And it's confusing because do I have to try in order to destroy all effort? Do I have to sit down and do a meditation? Well, in that way, aren't I putting forth effort to destroy effort? Desire and affliction and the escape from suffering. Rather was his teaching designed to picture to mortal man the futility of pinning all hopes and aspirations entirely on temporal goals and material objectives. So that is that's a more balanced approach to saying we should not, it doesn't matter if you don't get the promotion, then don't, end your life, is what I feel as if the original teaching was. But then the humans turned that into thou shalt not even seek thine promotion, because that is this striving sort of thing. It was not so much that love of one's fellows should be shunned, as that the true believer should also look beyond the associations of this material world to the realities of the eternal future. So he was more in line with this fellowshipping, right? But if we're doing something like eliminating all desire or something like that, then one could leave that room open for, I shouldn't love my fellows because love is hate and love is an illusion and hate is an illusion. And again, this is just my interpretation of it as somebody who has looked, I'm some mildly familiar with it. So if I'm wrong out there, then just definitely correct me. But if there's room for me to misinterpret it as a thinking philosophical person, then it shows to me that there's something missing. The moral commandments of Gautama's preachment were 5 in number. You shall not kill. See, in fact, everybody should be a Buddhist just based on this one thing. If they just had that, the world would be that much more better. So you're seeing that there are these amazing ideals here. You shall not steal. Again, you shall not be unchaste. Growth of character, right? Prioritizing. Self-mastery. You shall not lie. You shall not drink intoxicating liquors. How many problems has that created in the world that a wise being would say, do we really need this? Shouldn't we go without, because of all those different, causing cancers, how many drunk driving incidences, how many fights, how many breakups, and that sort of thing. There were several additional or secondary commandments whose observance was optional with believers. Siddhartha hardly believed in the immortality of the human personality, and this Urantia book teaches that we have this personality that is going to continue on in the universe, and we are going to experience what the afterlife is like as ourselves. His philosophy only provided for a sort of functional continuity. He never clearly defined what he meant to include in the doctrine of nirvana. This, again, it's leaving room for this, almost I would call circular logic, because it's like, well, what is nirvana? It's the destruction of suffering. Well, what is the end of suffering? It is nirvana. And it just becomes this self-referential loop rather than having a creator personality where these ideals stem from, that we can say, we want to destroy suffering because God is, our goal and ultimate destiny. Whereas without that, it's hard to define. I mean, even a child could say, all right, we can go to heaven, sort of thing. And that's a simplistic version of your paradise ascent, which is world after world and life after life. But nirvana, I don't necessarily know. Now here, it kind of clarifies. The fact that it could theoretically be experienced during mortal existence would indicate that it was not viewed as a state of complete annihilation. It implied a condition of supreme enlightenment, good word, supernal bliss, we like that, wherein all fetters binding man to the material world had been broken. Does that mean I can't go watch the game with my buddies on Sunday because I have to break all my material world attachments? A little extreme. There was freedom from the desires of mortal life and deliverance from all danger of ever again experiencing incarnation. Now, this is my take on this line right here. There was freedom from the desires of mortal life and the deliverance from all danger of ever again. Now, the desires of mortal life, again, that could be like what if I wanted to be the head of my church? That could be a desire of mortal life, because I think that could be an ego type of desire. It's okay to have that little bit of proportional ego in there. And as he said, he wasn't seeking to destroy all that stuff. That was more that came to it. Now, the deliverance from all danger of ever experiencing incarnation, that to me is like they're saying incarnation, cycle of rebirth and death. That's the thing that we need to destroy. We need to be, that's like the danger, deliver yourself from this, deliver yourself from this. Well, one way, what if there was no humans on the planet? What if every one of those world leaders pressed that button at the same time and then they wiped out the whole planet? Wouldn't everybody then just go to nirvana because nobody could have a baby, right? There'd be no. So that's probably just, I'm sure somebody that was Buddhist would say why that wouldn't satisfy that. But again, it's philosophical, so I'm just kind of freely philosophically musing on these things. According to the original teachings of Gautama, salvation is achieved by human effort, apart from divine help. There's no place for saving faith or prayers to superhuman powers. Gautama, in his attempt to minimize the superstitions of India, endeavored to turn men away from the blatant claims of magical salvation. So he had this good attempt. I don't think of salvation as this magical thing. I think of it as faith, which is 100% real. It's a 100% reality. But I can see they had all these superstition types of things. And, we don't want magic. We just want reality. And this salvation, we like human effort. We want to put forth effort. And that's why the Urantia book synthesizes God as being deity and divinity. There's that deity aspect. And it synthesizes that faith in that deity grants you the eternity, which was what Jesus of Nazareth taught. But then it reveals that mastery, effort, is how you advance in that eternity. So it's synthesizing both those aspects. And in making this effort, he left the door wide open for his successors to misinterpret his teachings and to proclaim that all human striving for attainment is distasteful and painful. His followers overlooked that the fact the highest happiness is linked with intelligent and enthusiastic pursuit of worthy goals. That's like being that preacher or the head of your church or something, some worthy type of goal, like marriage, family, that sort of stuff. And the great truth, and that such achievements constitute true progress in cosmic self-realization. So there's more of a balance, I believe, with the original teachings of Siddhartha. And again, Buddhism is so vast and varied, and people have all sorts of different interpretations of it. There's so many different sects of it. So I'm not trying to pigeonhole or anything. I'm just giving my, interpretation of what we're reading here. The great truth of Siddhartha's teaching was his proclamation of a universe of absolute justice. Let's read that again. This is one of those divine ideals, justice. A great teacher Siddhartha was. Look at this truth that this great teacher came across. So this is why we're not saying, oh, Buddha, that's stupid stuff. We're saying, look at what he came across, a universe of absolute justice, which is a lesson that a lot of people are still missing when they say, look out there and say, oh, why is the world so unjust? It must mean there's no God. But justice is an impersonal aspect of deity, so you can discern a universe. That's that divinity type stuff. You can discern that while still not coming away that there's a personality called the universal parent. And the only way to discern the personality of the universal parent is through a change of heart and a faith walk, belief, faith, whatever you want to call it. He taught the best godless philosophy ever invented by mortal man. That's the one line that I say when people ask about Buddhism. I remembered that one. That, to me, sums it all up. He taught the best godless philosophy ever invented by mortal man. Now, there's so many deep philosophers out there, your Kants and your, Descartes. Well, Descartes had a God in his philosophy, so you wouldn't necessarily, but look at how deep he was. He did the best one, the best godless philosophy. But look at that key word there. It's a godless philosophy. It was the ideal humanism. Now, again, humanism is like a morality that you can differ on, because your right wing might fancy themselves a humanist, your left wing might fancy themselves a humanist, and they have each vastly different ideas on what that is, because that's human morality. But as a spiritualist, we know that if morality stems from God, then they are divine ideals, they're unifying ideals, love, justice. And so there's no misinterpretation of what those are. Humanism is fallible, based on the human mind, and most effectively removed all grounds for superstition, magical rituals, and fear of ghosts or demons. Now, they added all those back into Buddhism with your spinning of the prayer wheels and your various hats and stuff like that. And again, if that's what people like, then you should do that. But I think you'd be doing yourself a disservice to think that that has anything to do with your connection to God, because, like I said, that is within your own heart and actions and that sort of stuff. But they line up. Well, let's carry on. Here it is. The great weakness in the original gospel of Buddhism was that it did not produce a religion of unselfish social service. The Buddhistic brotherhood was for a long time not a fraternity of believers, but rather a community of student teachers, isolating themselves off into a monastery in the middle of the mountains where they just have endless student teacher. Where this is saying, hey, you guys are so deep and, wise and things like that. You should socialize this. You should come out into your thing. And again, I know a lot of them do. But this is just saying, for a long time, it was just this fraternity of, or a community of student teachers. Gautama forbade their receiving of money. A little extreme there. But he did have a positive thing, and thereby sought to prevent the growth of hierarchical tendencies. We want to redistribute the wealth, but we don't need to say we must ban all money. We're trying to find that more harmonious common ground. Gautama himself was highly social. Indeed, his life was much greater than his preachment. Look at that. See, he was highly social. I don't believe Buddha was off in a monastery, and the same thing happened with Jesus. Was Buddha off in a monastery, lining up all the little boys ready to shave their heads every single day as part of a ritual? Well, they're doing that now at a lot of Buddhist monasteries, and I don't necessarily know. Buddha wouldn't even recognize it, they said, if he looked at it. Just like Jesus wouldn't recognize it if he looked at what they were doing. Well, I was like, what the hell are you guys? That has nothing to do. I was talking about God, connection. Buddha would be like, I'm talking about going within, self-mastery. And those are really key things and to say, don't be a robot mind, Buddha was saying. Don't just be a non-thinking response stimulus mind. When something happens, say, do I have to just immediately suffer because of this? No, I'm going to take a few breaths, feel the calmness around me, become my own inner Buddha. But if I'm having difficulty with that and finding the strength, I'll say, God, just give me the strength to do that. You see, that's where I just synthesize these things to say, yes, we want to do what Gautama says and not just respond and say, I must suffer because this happened to me and take a few steps. But if you don't have the strength to do it, it's okay to have a relationship with deity and divinity. You do not have to be one or the other, people. Okay, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to synthesize this. Also, you have even more tools than just being Buddhist, and you're adding to the revelation of the life of Jesus of Nazareth, and you're adding to the revelation of the Urantia book by using your own personal experience, your own living relationship with truth, beauty, goodness, God, deity, and divinity. And so keep that in mind. Thank you again for checking out the video, and we'll see you in the next one.